Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
It can happen. What's happening?
What's happening?
What's happening?
Well, the good ship, What Matters Most, continues to sail towards its harbor.
This has been so fun.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had a lot of great feedback from people in the congregation who've said they're actually going to miss the series.
That's always nice to hear.
Yeah, it really is. The opposite is not so good.
Yeah.
But I thought that was, those were lovely comments. And it's part of it is that there's something to look forward to. I'd mentioned that we've been, we've been exploring the word faith, and then we come into really two interesting words that I think do not normally pop up in the Christian vocabulary, curiosity and clarity.
I'm really excited about these two.
Me too.
Because they feel different and fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although, don't ask me what music we're going to do, because I don't know yet. It's fine.
You're going to miss that monthly, surge of creative energy as you think.
Am I? I don't. It's a good challenge.
That's what we want to hear.
What's the phrase you use? Growing edge?
Growing edge. Yep. Life is full of them.
I hear that a lot in my annual review. What's the growing edge? It's great. It's such a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I was reading something recently and someone had said, curiosity, that's such a shallow thing. I thought, wait a second.
Whoa.
Yeah. Wasn't that amazing? And
what?
And I just love the whole notion of curiosity. And
I have to say, every year, I think curiosity is maybe the most fundamental thing for vibrancy, for life, for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, we're not in Curiosity Month right now, but I have some big feelings about it, clearly.
We're gonna explore them.
I'm excited. But we are still in Faith Month.
We're still in Faith Month.
And it's been kind of disjointed because you've been gone, I've been gone, So we wanted to bring it together, tie it up, I guess, as you can with the idea of faith. As Aaron, who was our guest preacher on Sunday, said,
wonderful message.
Faith. Yikes.
Yeah. What is it?
What is it? How do you define such an almost ephemeral concept that also feels so big?
Well, I really enjoyed that message from Aaron Keyes. It was a great message. And I thought it was very clear in the sense that, let's not take for granted what we mean when we use this word. I mean, what in the world do we mean? And so quite often in the church, we'll hear the phrase, how do we grow our faith? How do we strengthen it? How do we deepen it? So we're using all of these words to try to, in some ways, expand it, right?
Right.
The question is, what is it?
Right.
What is it that we're expanding?
Right.
And so thinking about the message from this past Sunday, I was doing some reflection on it yesterday. And so the question comes up, so is faith the relationship that we have with God? Is faith the set of doctrines that our particular denomination may view as being very important and essential? Is faith the prayer that someone gets home safely? Is faith the fact that I reach out for healing when I need it most, hoping that somebody can come back to me with some resources that I need because I'm hurting? And it simply struck me that the answer is yes. It's all those things.
It's all those things.
And we don't have to make choices. Now, I say that we don't have to make choices. And I'm going to add a caveat to that.
Oh, good.
Because in the early part of the 20th century, there was a group of religious leaders, and I don't know a lot about the history of this, so I can't speak extensively on it. But this was at the time when a set of documents were created called the fundamentals.
Okay.
And I think that you might even say from day one, in terms of any faith tradition, there's always this desire to capture it.
Sure.
Right. Can we articulate it in a phrase or in a series of phrases? Is it the 10 Commandments, right? We're getting that debate going on right now, and that's been going on. So the creation of this set of documents called the Fundamentals was designed, I think, to answer once and for all, here's the content of our faith. And in order to be a faithful person, you need to be able to say, I believe those fundamentals.
Right.
And from that experience, we get the term fundamentalism.
Right.
So that's where that originates.
Okay.
And my sense is I have always belonged to traditions that did not require me to make those kind of faith statements.
Sure.
Right. And I know that that's a very important part of other faith traditions, so I'm not dismissing it in any way. But I also think that there are faith traditions that going back to the earlier comment, that say, is faith this, 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 and this? And the answer is yes. It's all these things and more. And it changes and it evolves and it's a growing, living thing. And when I say it's a growing, living thing, I know that automatically sets me in opposition to those who believe it's not a growing, living thing. It's a set thing. And I can always count on it being there. And I can always use it as a kind of a touchstone. So even within the vast world of Christianity, there are all of these different ways of approaching the little word faith.
Yeah.
Just making sense.
This is making a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm really interested, and I feel like you've defined something for me that I sort of intuitively knew, but hadn't put my finger on about what I love about this community, which is that, we don't have sort of like the relative comfort sometimes of like, here's the box. Like, here's the box. Here's the things that we believe we as a community agree on, we as a tradition agree on, that we can all sort of brings us together and we can kind of hang our hat on. We don't really have that, which can feel chaotic, but also like in a great way, in an individual, collective, like there's a looseness to it, but I find that within that there is a great freedom for exploration.
Yes.
And a great freedom for questioning and asking. They say there's no dumb questions. I feel like here, there's no dumb questions. There's no question too small. And there's no question too big. And I feel like sometimes maybe we're discouraged from asking like the really fundamental questions of Christianity and of faith. And I feel like here it's like, let's talk about it.
Right.
What do you like, that opens us up in a way that I think is really interesting and exciting and to me feels freeing and feels sort of affirming. Yeah. The fact that like we don't have it all together.
Well, what will make your observation even more interesting is the fact that this community used to have a statement.
That I forgot about that.
And that was in place. It wasn't always in place.
Right.
So obviously, at some point, it was formed. It was drawn from another resource, actually.
Yeah.
That had been used. And so, I think that what's really interesting is that this community has changed over the years in the way that it articulates its faith.
Sure.
So I think that that's exciting.
Yeah.
Right. And to stay with that. And in some traditions, that would be much too much change.
Right.
So anyway, we are here where we are. Yeah. and we're living through this experience. I do think that what it means for us when we're answering the word, so what is faith? I think quite naturally we go back, at least in this particular congregation, we tend to be very story driven. Right. So we are very based in not just in biblical texts, but in music. Right. So music, texts, art, discussion, all of these ways, these spiritual practices, I guess I would call them, are the way in which we identify what it means to be faithful at a certain time. And for a period of time, going on for almost 3 years, we were part of an initiative called Creating a Culture of Calling.
That's right.
And if there's anything that talks about, I think that invites us to think about what it means to be faithful, it's definitely that, because it means that we have the faith that if we listen and if we think it through and if we meet with others, we'll get ideas and we'll get directions about how we are to move into the future. And that those may change, they may be very vibrant for a time, and then they'll need to be relinquished and something else take their place.
So when I'm thinking about faith, and I was thinking back to, if you guys can hear that, with someone's moving some chairs upstairs, it's fine. There's neither an earthquake nor a thunderstorm.
Yeah, it's not the thunder over our conversation. Right?
Yeah, we're fine. There's not judgment coming. No, we're fine. I was thinking about the word belief.
Yes,
so I feel like that's a aspect of faith or a synonym for faith, but I feel like it has a different quality there.
Agreed.
So how do those interact for you?
Oh, I think that is a great question. And it leads me to a story.
Yay. Perfect.
So in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there were two biblical scholars who became friends. And they started to write together and create a lot of programming that became available for people in all places. So one of them was a biblical scholar. One of them was more of a historian. The biblical scholar was John Dominic Crossan, and the historian was Marcus Borg. And these two men began to meet and talk. They were very much in the same wavelength in terms of how they approached biblical texts. And they started to write books for lay people who were thinking about the very questions we're thinking about. And one of the cornerstones of their conversation had to do with the word belief. Because people have been moving away from mainline Christianity for a long time now. And one of the reasons they were doing that, or people would say that, this is the reason why I'm leaving, is I just can't believe that anymore. Whatever that was. And that little word "that" was filled with a lot of different things that people couldn't believe in anymore. They'd kind of lost their faith in the institution. And so Borg and Crossan repeatedly made this point that faith is primarily about relationship, not so much about belief.
Okay.
And what happens when believing in your beliefs is the most important part of your faith journey, you may find that your relationship scale has gone way, way down.
Sure.
And, I've heard people in my congregations over the years say, I don't really know what it means to have a relationship with God or a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
What they had been told, they might have been told at some point, here's what you should believe about God. Here's what you should believe about Jesus. But in terms of having any kind of a connection, that had sort of atrophied.
Sure.
So they tried to bring back this sense that Jesus, for example, is a spirit-centered person. What would it mean to be spirit-centered persons? A lot of people found that language much more easy to work with.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that, to me, faith suggests more of the relationship. Belief, it tends to be what we think about things, and so we can think a lot about things and really not necessarily have a great relationship.
Got it. Okay. That's really interesting. To me, that relationship aspect of it, I have to say, sometimes I'm thinking right now of, there's like a kind of a section of music where the text sometimes sounds like you're singing about Jesus as if he's your boyfriend. And I will say that to me, I get really like a opposite.
You don't lean
battery.
into that?
No. Well, because the thing is, as a young person, that was the community I was worshiping in. And so I was like, oh, okay, sure. I wasn't thinking very critically about it. I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. Okay, we're singing that. And then years later, and as I grew and had some different thoughts about things, I was just like, oh, that makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like finding my way through what that felt like, and trying to figure out, like, you know what it feels like? This is so, I hope someone can relate to this, because otherwise this is very random. But it feels like when you've gone through a big breakup, but you still want to be friends with your ex. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have those feelings anymore, but you're still like, you're a really good person.
Right.
And I want to have you in my life and be, have a relationship, but it's not that.
Right.
So,
right.
So if anyone who came from sort of an evangelical tradition, but is not into that anymore, that's currently what that feels like.
That's really interesting. I bet that would resonate with a lot of people.
Well, please let me know that I'm not alone with this, but it's, I'm just now like giving voice and words to this, but I think that's when I hear, oh, I have a relationship with God, a relationship with Jesus. I am partially, part of me is like, that sounds really special. That
Yes.
sounds really beautiful. And part of me is like, I don't know how to do that without it being weird.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, like I've struggled with that language because I don't know what it means. I don't know what that means for me,
Sure.
you know?
Well, I think that you are definitely not alone.
Oh, thanks.
Would be my sense of
Appreciate
that.
the affirmation.
And so so here's a couple of thoughts about that. I think that I've sometimes used the phrase community of faith to describe like Round Hill Community Church or whatever. I think now, based on this month of exploring, I would call it a community of faiths in the plural.
Yeah, I like that.
Because to your point, the feelings that you've just described, right, would resonate with some. They wouldn't resonate with others.
Sure.
And you'd have other people on the continuum would say, I'm nowhere even near that.
Right.
Like I'm even farther off here in the distance.
Sure.
Right. So I think you get all of these different faith orientations, I'll call them.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Along the continuum.
Sure.
Right? Which is exciting because if those faith perspectives can talk to one another, then it may be that part of what makes you feel uncomfortable now might not be so uncomfortable 2 years from now because of what you've learned. But you're looking very skeptical.
No, I hope so.
Right?
I will have hope for that.
Right?
Yeah.
And likewise, the perspective you've offered may be very beneficial to someone else, you know, because you've articulated something that someone says, oh my gosh, that's how I feel. And that was how when Borg and Crossan came out with a book called Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, that was their desire to have people say, wait a second, I've always had this kind of feeling, but I didn't really know you could express that.
Right.
Or I didn't think you could articulate that.
Right.
And by the way, I was serving a church at the time and I'd given this book to a handful of people and they were so impressed by this perspective that here were finally people speaking their language. Right. We actually bought copies of the book for every household in the congregation.
Oh, nice.
Because we just felt like this was probably going to be speaking to a lot of different people. Right. So I think where we are now, specifically, you know, in our kind of the world, in terms of how we organize ourselves religiously, we're giving a lot of space to people, just as you are experiencing what you are right now, to say, okay, so where might that journey lead?
Yeah.
Like what resources might you need in order to say, okay, this feels uncomfortable, but I'd still like to explore it somewhat, right? Yeah. How can I do that? And I think that part of what's happening as the mainline church, we keep hearing about that as if that's the only experience of church in the world, you know, and it's receding and how awful. Actually, a lot of other interesting little permutations of church are popping up on the, you know, outside of that. And I think those are people who are bringing all of these questions and found that, hey, we couldn't really talk about this when we were back in our congregations.
Yeah.
But now we're 4 people sitting around Starbucks on Sunday morning and we can talk about it.
Right.
And I think that's exciting.
And there's that idea of like, oh, I shouldn't say stuff like that. Like there's this little part of my brain right now that's like deeply feels like I shouldn't have said any of that because that you're not, as a Christian person, you're not supposed to say stuff like that. Like there's a part of my brain at this moment feeling like,
I can identify with that.
But I think that's the thing about these conversations we have on this podcast, these conversations we have in our community where it's like, no, say the thing. And there's not going to be a judgment because we're all in different spaces. And like you said, we're all along, I think you used the word continuum. It brought in my mind the idea. So when I'm working on design stuff, I get a color spectrum.
Yes. Yeah.
And so instead of a line, it's a big circle. And there's just all the colors of the rainbow. And I feel like that kind of image of like faith and where we, you know, if we're in the blues or I'm in the greens or I'm in the purples or, you know, and there's different saturations of those colors. And there's so much beautiful variation of color and depth that people bring every week into these conversations. And they're made the more rich by people's different faiths, by different sort of sets of beliefs and life experiences, that it makes things all the more rich for their presence with us and the things they bring, the ideas they bring, and the I ran out of steam with that sentence. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Well, if faith is what some people have described it over the years as being, which is the great adventure.
Yeah.
Right. And that God is, as it's sometimes been described, is the beautiful question. That if we can keep the great adventure together with the beautiful question and just keep asking, keep learning together. And I think one of the things that grounds us week in and week out is that we have our weekly gathering when we sing and we pray and we connect with one another, and there's reflection by a preacher, and there's stories for children. When we're doing that, it's keeping that journey alive. And if we get disconnected from that, then I think sometimes faith can, what you may be left with is faith as sort of a solo journey, a solo enterprise.
Sure.
You know? And like any great adventure, that's hard to maintain alone.
Right.
And so I think that for me, the gift of community is that keeps us in that conversation. And it's a community that one of the blessings of being part of a community is that it can push us out of our comfort zones. And I think that when we're thinking about the word faith, we may have all kinds of feelings about it. But I think the community, being part of the community, especially if it's a community of faiths, plural, that inevitably you're going to run into somebody who's going to push you out of your comfort zone.
Sure.
They may have what we experience as a strength of belief that we cannot identify with, right? On the other hand, someone else may have a strength of questioning that we can't identify with. But if we can connect with that person and say, what is that teaching you? And how can I be part of that? Then the community is doing its work. So that, I think, is about as far as I've gotten. The deeper we've gotten into this during the month of June, I just am flooded with questions. Zero. I feel like I have zero answers half the time, but it's wonderful to be on this journey, and the fact that we've been able to have these conversations, alongside that exploration, that's been a gift.
Well, speaking of journey,
yes,
and adventure and questions,
speak of it.
That was a fantastic pivot. Thank you very much, by the way.
Accidental.
We are heading into our new, I keep forgetting about clarity and curiosity because my brain is already
jumping over,
but I'm excited about them. But our 2024-2025 worship series,
yes,
52 for the Journey, will be launching in September. And we're very excited about this because we are going to be telling 52 essential stories of faith. And as part of that, you will all be given a copy of our guidebook and journal once I finish it.
Magnificently created by Leslie.
Thank you. It's getting there. But we're very excited about this because it's really going to be, I think, a really interesting experience of both community and then individual reflection. There'll be scriptures in the book for you. There's place for writing, for thoughts, for doodling, and some thought-provoking questions for you. And I think it's going to be a really fun journey that we'll all take together.
Agreed.
And so I'm really excited for that. So keep an eye out. We'll have a way for you to order one online if you are not local. And we will... I'm excited about that. It's going to be really fun.
Me too.
So thank you all so much for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.